Hi, Len Edgerly here. If this is your first visit to the Kindle Chronicles podcast, welcome. If you are a longtime listener, welcome back for the 565th episode. Today is May 21st, and I'm talking to you from downtown Denver, where, well, it's dark, but I can still see tents set up down on Larimer Street because the annual Chalk Artist Festival is going to be held this weekend, hopefully without any rain. My guest this week is John Rossman, who had a top job at Amazon for a few years back in the early 2000s, and that was back when no one in their right mind expected the company's stock to take off like a Blue Origin rocket to its current price of more than $1,700 per share. In fact, AMZN was selling for less than $10 a share when John joined Amazon in 2002, and it was stuck there when he, along with others, left before the miracle happened. In the midst of a successful career now as an author, executive coach, and speaker, Rossman has a good attitude about what might have been.
Thank goodness I am not susceptible to, kind of that looking backwards mentality. I think that's a really hard way to go through life.
I'm going to switch the order of things up today by starting with the interview, followed by your comments, of which there were an unusual number in reaction to last week's annotated interview with Tracy Schultz, head of Kindle Reading at Amazon. If there had been a news section this episode, I would have told you there is a new, smaller version of the Echo Show available for pre-order with delivery on June 26th. It's called the Echo Show 5 because its screen is smaller than the second generation show at 5.5 inches diagonal. It's also cheaper at $90 compared with $230 for the second generation Echo Show, the one I have at my desk here in Denver. And the new show includes a physical slide button to cover the camera, as well as a button that turns off the microphone and camera with one press. There's also been an update to the whole Alexa platform that takes into account people's concerns about whether or not the device is listening and how you can have more control over your privacy, along the lines of what we talked about in last week's episode. You will find links to the Echo Show available in white or black in the show notes. With that, let's turn to my conversation with John Rossman. A graduate of Oregon State University with a degree in industrial engineering, John Rossman describes himself at LinkedIn as, quote, an advisor to companies and leaders working to innovate and compete with more agility and effectiveness. He held key positions at Amazon from April of 2002 until November of 2005, including Director of Merchant Integration, in which role he launched and scaled Amazon Marketplace, which now accounts for more than 50% of physical gross merchandise sales sold on Amazon by third-party sellers. As the current head of Rossman Partners, his clients have included the Gates Foundation, Microsoft, Nordstrom, T-Mobile, and Walmart. John is also an author, and his latest book is what caught my attention and led me to invite him on the show. It's titled Think Like Amazon, 15 and a Half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader. It was published last month by McGraw-Hill. I connected with him on May 28th by Skype in San Clemente, California, and I began by asking him about his current work at Rossman Partners.
I do a couple of things at Rossman Partners. First is I help leaders with their digital strategy, with their corporate culture, and with really kind of figuring out how to compete differently, right? And you can say it's the digital era or just the era we live in, but I like working with leaders over a long period of time to help them figure out how to compete differently, how to build the right team and organizational structure to do it. So I'm on a number of advisory boards, plus I just have a couple of clients and executives that I coach over a long period of time. And the other thing I do is I get the opportunity to go out and talk to lots of teams and conferences and events, primarily about how to compete differently in the digital era.
Now, your new book, I think it came out just about a month ago, Think Like Amazon, 50 and a Half Ways to Become a Digital Leader. What's the elevator description of that?
Yeah, so it's really the unpacking of all of the types of questions I've gotten over the years about, well, how would Jeff think about this? How would Amazon go about that? Would Amazon be interested in this, topic, or will Amazon compete with me someday on that? And, the thing I always say about Amazon is what they will do next, I think, is fairly unpredictable, and everything. But how they go about their process of operating, how they go about their process of gaining clarity on what they could do and how they make decisions, that is completely predictable. So this is really the playbook of how Amazon goes about their work. And I've bundled them into bite-sized concepts, into these ideas that you can then decide, well, what's my version of that? Is that applicable to my business? And in no way do I ascribe that any of these are the right implementation for your team, but just thinking through how you think about that topic is a plus for a business person, and figuring out, well, what are the 3 to 4 ideas that might be applicable to your organization, and putting those into play to help make change happen better.
So it's really learning from Amazon for someone's own business, as opposed to using the knowledge of their process to predict whether they might be competing with somebody.
That's absolutely correct, right? I always say, the book isn't about Amazon. The book is about what are you going to do? How are you going to change to compete differently? Leveraging Amazon's playbook for how they go about their business.
In Amazon's playbook, that's a very compelling image. Boy, if I could ever get a hold of Amazon's playbook, wouldn't that be great? How confident are you that the playbook that you remember when you worked there 13 plus years ago, that they haven't kind of secretly changed it, and that it's quite different, that if you were to parachute into a job now, you'd find it very different?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a very fair question. So I was at Amazon a long time ago. So I was there from early 2002 through late 2005. That was really the period of time when we were forming the leadership principles, when we were figuring out we were both a platform company as well as a retailer, and really codified a lot of this thinking. I still have a lot of friends, contacts, people at Amazon. I'm always testing these concepts, like, well, how are you doing this? Are you still using these? And it's although the organization has changed 1,000 times and it's 1,000 different ways, how they go about their work is I won't say exactly, but it's almost exactly how it was when I was there. And I've incorporated the things that I've learned from working with Amazon since then and from my friends into the book. So these aren't just only the things that I've observed at Amazon. I've done a lot of interviewing and a lot of research to add to this playbook.
It seems like that very consistency that you would be hearing and seeing evidence of the same principles now, that itself is one of Amazon's advantages, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, they have 14 leadership principles, and those leadership principles really do help scale the organization, because this is the belief system of how we work together is really what the leadership principles, the 50 and a half ways that I outline here, are really the mechanisms and the strategies underneath those leadership principles for how those come to life. But it is a tremendous advantage for them to have the clarity and the consistency of how they go about their work, because it allows them to scale into a conglomerate business today, and one that's fairly low bureaucracy and very entrepreneurial and fast moving. And that's the advantage they have, is their size, but they also still act like entrepreneurs, right? And so that combination is a killer combination.
What do most companies that you talk to get wrong about innovation?
Yeah, well, they get a lot of things wrong about innovation. I think the first is that they try to govern innovation investments or bets or projects. They try to govern them the same way that they do their normal type of project, right? And a normal type of project is basically like, if we execute well, we should attain success. A true innovation, a bet, something you don't know whether it's going to work out, that same governance approach will actually cause tremendous problems, challenges for innovation bets. And so that's one thing they get wrong. The other is they don't actually have a defined process for how they make decisions about what do we invest in and what don't we invest in. And the third one that I'll bring up now is that they tend to make when they do have a good idea, they commit to scaling it way too early versus incubating it, right? And so then what happens is you set expectations internally and externally. You have to scale it up before it's ready, right? And I think one of the tricks of innovating is how to trial something, how to incubate something, and then when it's ready from an operational standpoint, from a customer experience standpoint, from a cost standpoint, then you scale it. And people like to skip that incubation phase.
So incubation is, you've had a trial, it's promising. How can you describe when the incubation period is over and you should move to scaling?
Yeah, so let's work this through the example of like the Amazon Go store, right? So the Amazon Go store, a set of innovations relative to just walk in, just walk out technology. Amazon had a trial store that they worked through all of the how does it actually work. Then they've created, I think it's about 10 stores today, and they're letting that work its way out. And you know you're ready to scale when you've got all of your operational metrics well under control and you're ready to set SLAs. You know you're ready to scale.
SLA is what?
Service level agreement, right? So uptime, availability, speed, security, all of those things. You know you're ready to scale when you've got your cost basis correct, right? And so when your unit cost is at the range you need it to be, and you don't have to continue to radically improve that cost basis, you're ready to scale. And when you've got the customer experience just right. And I think Amazon is continuing to turn the knobs a little bit on all three of those with the Amazon Go stores.
So that's still incubation?
I think so. You've heard them announce that they're going to start ramping up the number of stores, but they haven't really done it yet. And I think it's because they're still figuring out exactly what the right mix is, how to get the revenue and the cost basis to where it needs to be before you put 1,000 stores in the fleet.
So probably Amazon Books might still be in a form of incubation as well.
Yeah, I agree with that premise. I think that they are still figuring out exactly how do we make this into, from kind of a novelty to a much bigger presence and scale that out.
It seems like sometimes, the Alexa came out as invitation only or beta testing. The one that was announced, I think more than a year ago, was Alexa for the car, which of course would be a killer place to have Alexa. And it's still by invitation only, so it's still in beta. When you see a product like that come out of beta and anybody can just order it from the website, is that when it has therefore begun to scale?
That's right. And a situation like Alexa in the car, there's so many dependencies and partners outside of Amazon's direct control that really is going to be a long, slow ramp probably to gain adoption.
Yeah. You were at the ground level of something which became one of the huge aspects of Amazon's success, Amazon Marketplace, where third-party sellers were able to sell. And I was curious what you make of criticism. It's Senator Elizabeth Warren is one of the people, but other people have said it's time to change the antitrust philosophy and go at Amazon. And I've heard her speak fairly persuasively to me as a layman who knows nothing about antitrust law, say it's like if you're playing baseball and you could be the umpire or you could be the team, but you can't be both. And she's applying it to Amazon Marketplace, saying Amazon now has this place where lots of people are selling, and what's to keep them from watching some third party get very successful and then come in and use their knowledge and basically compete unfairly because it's their platform. And I was just wondering if, since you knew about the genesis of Amazon Marketplace and probably pretty familiar with some of the behind the scenes now. Is that a realistic concern for somebody that isn't just anti-Amazon, but just wants the economy to work well and to have plenty of opportunity for new entrepreneurs to get started using something like Amazon Marketplace? I mean, if you were advising one of these presidential candidates on this question about how hard to come at Amazon from a thoughtful economic viewpoint, what would you say?
Well, I'm not an expert on anti-competitive policy, and so it's difficult for me to comment on what actually constitutes anti-competitive behavior. When we launched, so I helped launch the marketplace business in 2002, our spirit and everything we did was really about creating a great customer experience, and that we needed a fair and level platform in order to do that. And so, while obviously Amazon has ramped up their private label businesses that compete with sellers, and they do put things into first-party inventory versus third-party inventory, nothing I've seen or heard really, to me, says that it's an unlevel playing field. I think the biggest aspects are, anytime you are dependent upon another party for customer acquisition, you are at a strategic disadvantage. And that is just inherent to the business model of marketplace. And so it's tough for me when I hear this type of discussion going on. I always hear a slight tinge of complaining and whining along with it, right? Amazon has just built a tremendous business, a competitive business. And I think they should be, on one hand, I think those are important policy decisions to ask, but I think they should also be congratulated for sticking with it when everybody bet against them on this.
Yeah, and you were probably at a period when there were plenty of naysayers, and it had failed twice before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't think that part of the story of Amazon and Bezos gets told enough about how he bet on himself and on the idea of Amazon. They stuck with it when everybody was a naysayer. They stuck with it for a long period of time when the stock was flat and there was no accretive wealth being created. And I think it's really the all-American dream of how Amazon has progressed. And I don't think that story gets told enough.
Yeah. I think you're starting to be interviewed for that job you took at Amazon in 2001, and the stock price, I checked back, it was less than $10, which was a big drop from $85 in November of 1999. Did people who cared about you say, John, what are you doing going to work for this sinking ship that looks like it's going to go the way of all the other internet whiz-bang companies?
My wife and I had a couple of those types of conversations, and I think, but I had confidence. I had a number of friends there. I saw the promise of the business, and I just couldn't see any real long-term downside in the, I've always been more of bet on myself and bet on the types of experiences that I'm going to gain. And I was like, even if it's a bad business outcome, it's going to be a tremendous experience. And it truly did shape me. Obviously, it impressed me enough that I've written these books and always used their mindset and their plays in working with my clients.
What can you tell me about your decision to leave Amazon?
Yeah, so I left Amazon in late 2005. What people remember now is basically since 2009, 2010, all Amazon stock has done is rise up, right? It's gone up and to the right. It's increased. But there was about a 8 or 9 year period where it was essentially flat. Mm-hmm. And I was there during a middle 4 years of that 9 year period. And as a senior person at Amazon, you take a very below market salary, and all of your upside is in stock. And so at some point, you just kind of lose patience relative to that. And nobody at Amazon saw this coming. So many really good people just couldn't stick with it, and I was one of those people who just couldn't stick with it because of your opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
But I've never looked backwards. I get friends all the time kind of asking me to do the math of like, how much, and like, I just, thank goodness I am not susceptible to, kind of that looking backwards mentality. I think that's a really hard way to go through life.
Well, there's also, you talk about the mercenaries versus the missionaries, the coin-operated manager. It sounds like you had other motivations in your life that have protected you from doing that math every day as to what you would have been worth.
Yeah, I wanted to be even more direct control of, my business and the types of deals I was doing and the types of results I had and, kind of the choices I was making relative to where I was spending my time. And my boys were little boys at the time, and one of the things I wanted was just the more flexibility to really participate with them.
Yeah. What are the big bets that you see Amazon making now that might become big businesses? That you highlight, I think, effectively. One of their advantages is this 5 to 7 year time horizon versus most companies in the next quarter or the next 2 to 3 years. Right. But are you reading some tea leaves or just having some hunches as to what they might be?
I don't think the things I'm thinking about are news breaking at all. I think all of these have been written about, but it really is because I think on some of these an even longer time period. But I think healthcare is going to be a really big set of businesses at Amazon. It won't be one business. It will be a multi-strategy, multi-prong, multi-business industry for them. And thank goodness, because I think we're all, as employers and as family leaders and as patients, pretty frustrated with the status quo and everything. The cost basis is just out of hand. And so I think Amazon will be a real exemplar in reducing friction, making a much more patient and family oriented set of businesses, and really integrating across the healthcare value chain. I think logistics will continue to be a very interesting and important set of businesses for Amazon, and you will see them continue to try new things, both in kind of backhaul logistics as well as last mile logistics. The number of things that they're doing just in kind of delivery innovations, right? They're doing delivery into the garage. They're doing delivery to trunk. They're doing. I just noticed this weekend I had a delivery, and the delivery person took a photo of the package at my doorstep, right? Which is just a way of helping to avoid some aspect of fraud and friction there, and confirmation that the package was received. Amazon's ability, for a customer's ability to select which day you want a package delivered. Think about the type of supply chain that it takes for a customer to be able to dictate what day they want their package delivered on. That's a tremendously flexible supply chain that you have in order to do that at order time. So those I think are the types of businesses that Amazon is going to be in. And then AWS, Amazon Web Services, their cloud computing business, I think is absolutely lined up to continue to out-innovate the competition and to change both the technology model, the cost model, and the ownership model for technology, which really helps allow others to innovate much faster, to try things on a lower cost basis, on a faster scale basis, and to switch things that used to be big capital costs into flexible into flexible spending operating costs.
How bullish are you on Alexa?
That's a great question. I am a moderate Alexa bull. I believe that voice over the next 15 to 20 years will be a tremendous interface for so many circumstances. But over the short term, what the transactional capability or upside is for Alexa, pretty moderate on. And I think the thing that Amazon is struggling a little bit with is that all of the skills that can be deployed to Alexa, actually, like, there needs to be some type of interface so that you understand, well, these are the skills you have that you don't have, and how to recall the words and the sequences you need. You probably have some insight on this too, but that's the type of early bet that Amazon is making. They see it as an operating system, right? They don't see it as a product, and so they are going to be patient with it. They are betting big on it, and it is. I don't think the game has even started there.
Kindle, of course, is an interest of mine, and the devices. Sometimes it seems as if that product is in the operational excellence, incremental benefits. I mean, it used to be when a new Kindle came out, they'd have a media show in New York, and I'd get to go, and it was like a big deal. Now they just send a press release saying we got a new version of the Kindle Fire or something like that. But do you see that area of Kindle books, the tablets, the devices, not necessarily the Alexa devices, kind of going along in that mode of incremental improvements, or are there a bunch of people at Lab 126 that are working as hard as they can for the next big thing, even in that area?
Yeah, I don't expect Amazon to surprise us on the hardware side of Kindle. I think you're going to see more growth. I don't know if it's innovation, but more growth in the Audible side and in the voice side. And they've added some really cool features to help you sync, kind of your read electronic with the voice. Mm-hmm. And I think that the opportunity to add more collaboration in the space is an opportunity, and maybe that's where you'd see some innovation. But I don't think it's going to be in the hardware side of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Customer obsession, of course, is the first principle. It's what most of us think about from the outside. But what other traits do you think define Amazon that are almost as important as customer obsession?
Yeah, I think customer obsession gets a little over-indexed as far as, like, it all boils down to that. And that is very important. It's the first among equal, but there are a lot of other traits to Amazon. And the one that I don't think people really understand is the attention to detail and having command of your business at Amazon as an operator. And that really is the orientation to metrics and putting metrics into action and always trying to get to root cause. Not the simple answer, but the root cause answer to fix it and to innovate through that obsession of trying to get to perfection. And so I think operational excellence and metrics is that if you ask somebody at Amazon, like, what's the rhythm of the business, it's about your metrics meetings, always understanding the details of your business, getting to root cause, and hitting your metrics that impact customers and your metrics that impact cost and quality.
I was fascinated by that. I'm an English major kind of guy. Metrics give me a migraine. It also seems that Amazon has this odd literary track to its the 6-page memos, the future press release. And are those two kind of in tension with each other? Are there some metrics guys and some word guys, or is everybody expected to be bilingual the way Bezos is on these things?
Yeah, well, I think the best people are bilingual. I don't think that represents the vast majority of people. But as he talked about in one of his latest shareholder letters, with practice, you actually can build better skills there. Like anything, right? If you're patient and if you have good exemplars and if the bar is high, you will grow skills in that area. I think to some degree I'm an example of that. I'm an engineer by background. Writing was never my forte or love, but the clarity of thought you have to have in order to write out a succinct, complete, written piece is so far superior to any other kind of exercise or form factor that you can put into, typically PowerPoint, right? And so how Amazon uses narratives and these other tools like future press releases and FAQs to get to clarity on what are they going to do in the future. They talk about working in the future, right? Yeah. And so operational excellence is about working in today. these other things are about working in the future, but they are tied together because it's really the problems and the insights that you get from operational excellence that get to seed a vast majority of the ideas that you innovate in the future.
Interesting.
And I think that is part of the Amazon approach is you can't separate out on some big bets and R&D oriented things you can separate out, but on the normal everyday innovation, the teams that operate have to be the teams that are defining what the future is.
Do you remember the first time you wrote a 6-page memo and a group of people were reading it for 15 minutes and your heart's beating, trying to wondering what the first comment's going to be, and that scene?
Yeah. I mean, it was really relative to the marketplace business, and the contention we really had was even at that small time at that time was concerns about disrupting and our existing business. And Jeff and the other leaders were so great at just immediately saying competition is good for everybody, even our internal retailers, right? And if you read this last shareholder letter, he is reiterating that, right? He leads off by showing the percentage by years of the marketplace business. Today it's 58%. And the first thing he says is marketplace is kicking our retail butt, right? and that really surprised me. But he internal competition is good. It raises everybody's level, and that was a factor even back then. And those were the types of things that as I remember going through the narrative and the future press release for the marketplace business, those were some of the issues that we were getting on the table even back then.
For an engineer, you had a nice literary reference to Moby Dick and Ahab, one of my favorite books, and you talk about the obsession that Ahab has with the white whale. Well, it turns out to be fatal, and it doesn't turn out well for him. And when I hear that word obsession, customer obsession, can you ever imagine that customer obsession as part of Amazon's culture becoming fatal in some way, that it takes them toward something which is not a success, and it has the seeds of its demise in the strength of the obsession?
Yeah, I think it's a I never say never, right, and everything, right? But again, it comes back to customer obsession is just one of the strategies and principles and beliefs and orientations of Amazon. And so like any good system, there are countermeasures and other objectives that you have to put into place, right? It's not just customer obsession. And so I don't think that's a probable scenario and everything, and we haven't seen it to date and stuff. I think they've tried some things because of customer obsession that didn't work out. Well, that's good, you know, and everything, right? But I don't think it's led to any downside, any real big accidents there.
Yeah. You've got some descriptions of Jeff in the book. At one point you call him a rationalist. He's a humble guy. He's a control freak. He can have pretty harsh answers to people he think are not answering his questions right. Are there other sort of human traits that you think go into that question of, well, what would Jeff do here? What other aspects of him would help someone either as someone to model after or have some sense of what his next competitive moves might be?
Well, I think, the traits that define Jeff is, he thinks big, he's patient, and he pays attention to details. And he rolls up his sleeves. Like, he doesn't just, I need a big idea, hand it to me. Like, he gets in there and he works on these things, right? And at times he oversees things, but at times he's just one of the collaborators, right? And so I think that combination is a big part of the magic essence of what makes Amazon, and why when you're a company and you need to compete differently, leaders have to be absolutely committed, not just involved, not just reluctantly going along with it. They have to be committed to the journey, right? Everybody wants the outcomes. we want success, we want growth, we want all these, but it's more about commitment to the process of what it takes to get there, right? And that it's bumpy, it's unpredictable, it's messy, you're going to have failures. Well, that takes strong gut to make that happen, and that's where leaders matter. And so that's, I think, what Jeff really brings to the table.
Well, I don't want to have any spoilers here, but you have included in the title of your book something which certainly catches most people's eye. You've got 50 and a half ways to become a digital leader. Can you say anything about that halfway?
Yeah, really, it really comes back to, kind of where we started the conversation, which is, this is Amazon's playbook, but the book isn't about Amazon. The book is about what are you going to be willing to do, to change? What new habits are you willing to create? Which of these ideas are you willing to put into place to make change happen? If you hear a lot about digital transformation. Well, it's not just something that happens to the organization. It's something that happens to you as a leader. And so it's really like back to you. What are you willing to do? That's really what the half idea is about.
Well, I think it's very clever. It's a good title.
Thank you.
I have been talking with John Rossman, author of Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half Ways to Become a Digital Leader, published about a month ago by McGraw-Hill. Thanks very much, John.
Len, thanks for having me.
We'll finish this episode by listening to some of your comments, beginning with Nadine Laird, whose review of the Moby Scribe tablet I shared in TKC 563 on May 18th. That was also the episode that featured my cousin Peter Tighe's overview of technology for the blind. Nadine emailed the following. Thank you very much for putting my review on the podcast. I felt quite honored and have the family listening to it now. As I may have mentioned, I save them and listen while I am doing chores on Saturday. I've been away and had a mishap, slipped and broke 2 toes, so I'm just getting back to my routine and heard the last 2 today. I was fascinated with that new technology for the blind. Too bad it is so expensive. Being a special educator and now volunteering with the elderly transitioning, Mr. Tighe's tips at the end of the interview were very helpful to keep in mind. Please forward my thanks. Nadine is referring to Peter's examples of how a sighted resident at his senior community might be helpful in the breakfast dining area. This is an example. And I was also struck by the helpfulness of what he said. First of all, he suggested introducing yourself and then giving some information that might be useful, such as, I'm leaving the dining room now, the rolls are stale, or I'm coming into the dining room, would you like to join me for breakfast? Nadine continued, I learned a lot from Ms. Schultz, that's Tracy Schultz, the Kindle reading director at Amazon, who was my guest last week. Nadine says, thanks for redoing the questions. That's because the audio on my end was pretty rough, so I re-recorded it with some annotations. She says, I could see how that sound would have been quite distracting. I guess those features, reading themes, page flip, white on black view, are exclusive to the Oasis, which now has me looking to upgrade to one. By the way, when one upgrades, what do they do with their older devices? Is there a charity they can be donated to? I replied to Nadine that she might consider Mark Isero's Kindle Classroom project as a place to donate her Kindle. You will find more information about that excellent program at kindleclassroomproject.org. On her question about the various reading features that Tracy mentioned, I have confirmed that they are all available on the current basic Kindle, the latest Paperwhite, and the latest Oasis. I suspect they are also available on other older models if you have the latest software updates. The one that's a little tricky to find is the invert black and white setting, which can be a good setting for reading in the dark. To get to it, start at your Kindle's homepage, then tap the 3 dots in the upper right, then settings, then accessibility. There you will find voice view screen reader, that's helpful for someone who's blind or vision impaired, as well as invert black and white. Nadine continued, I also liked Tracy's points of why one would have an e-reader anytime, anywhere reading, dictionary, synchronized reading with Audible. Those are the various advantages. I would like to add for some, it's an easy toggle between books. Many times I will purchase and start to read a fiction novel, and my library will announce that a nonfiction ebook that I have on hold is available. So I take it out, begin to read or listen to it before I have to return it to the library. I can conveniently go back to my novel whenever I want, as both are available on my device. One final note on her comment that ebook reading, quote, is not all or nothing. That is beautiful because it removes all guilt for me to just go to the library or Barnes & Noble and pick up a trashy romance or graphic novel. As usual, I continue to enjoy your podcast. Thanks again, Nadine. Steve Mashburn wrote, "Greetings, Len. Just finished listening to this week's podcast. Interesting to say the least. Nothing wrong with shaking things up. I went to 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock and 62 degrees in Denver. Pretty pleasant night. We had sushi for supper down the street. Nothing wrong with shaking things up," Steve writes. "I went to the notes to see if there was a link for contacting Tracy. No luck. If you have that available, I would appreciate it. Otherwise, maybe you can pass along the following. Why does Amazon continue to apparently refuse to bring to market a dedicated 10.3-inch Kindle? Yes, I know there are various devices in that size format available, but most, if not all, entail note-taking, drawing, and stylus activities which drive the price up. A front-lit 10.3-inch dedicated reader, a Kindle, would be a dream come true." I forwarded Steve's question to Tracy Schultz, but I haven't heard back yet. She probably won't be able to say anything about future plans, but will appreciate the feedback. After a decade of serving as kind of an unofficial link between Amazon and some of its most engaged customers, namely you listeners, I sometimes think I know what the answers will be when we ask questions. Maybe they'll surprise us on this one. I think that's a good suggestion. I was looking forward to connecting with Steve on my visit to Las Vegas next week, but he's on the mend from surgery, so here's to a speedy recovery, Steve, and I hope you've had a chance to catch up on some good reading during your downtime. Elizabeth emailed me about last week's Economist piece on the security issues surrounding Alexa and other smart speakers. "Security concerns are important," she wrote. The default should be opt-out, which would address those most concerned and force the user to make choices with good descriptions. Also, options should be made for parsed permissions. For example, when Alexa added the contacts feature, it grabbed the entire contact list. Maybe it still does, but most of us, myself included, would only want a few contacts allowed for family and close friends. I hope this feature is modified. P.S. I did not use the comments feature on your blog because I don't use Facebook. Thanks, Elizabeth. I've asked Libsyn about the Facebook requirement for comments on the show notes page at thekindlechronicles.com. I don't like that aspect of my switch from WordPress to Libsyn for the show notes, but I have appreciated how much faster I can post the show notes each week using Libsyn. I hope maybe they'll make it easier for listeners to leave comments sometime in the future. If you do have a comment, the best way is to just email it to me at podchronicles@gmail.com. I also check Twitter approximately 67 times a day, so if you leave me a tweet with @Len Edgerly attached to it, I will see it almost immediately. Listener Tom Semple wrote to tell me the Reading Insights feature mentioned by Tracy Schultz is also found on Kindle for Android, but not yet on Fire. Tom continued, "In its present form, I don't find Reading Insights all that useful. The Audible app has for some time tracked listening time with graphs and so forth, which is more approachable. But it also has badges for various achievements. Not sure how useful that is. Maybe there should be badges for reading Moby Dick or War and Peace, though." I appreciate that reference to a couple of my biggest reading projects on Kindle, Tom. I did finally finish War and Peace, and I am 40% through Moby Dick, I'm proud to report. Parenthetically, I am 42% through the 736-page The Mueller report, but quite a few of the pages are easy to skim because of the redactions. I very much enjoy reading the report myself compared to hearing others talk about it in the media. Tom continues, "In terms of taking features cross-platform, I'm still waiting for Word Runner on iOS, immersion reading on Kindle without highlighting if need be, just synchronize page turns, Kindle-style bookmarks on iOS and Android. You did a comparison a while back and it still applies," he says. "I also want Kindle app on iOS and Android to support standalone audiobooks, as the newer Kindles do, one-stop reading, collections, and ideally X-ray. Some audiobooks have reference material that could be automatically downloaded and accessible within the app as you are listening. The competition, Apple, Google, Kobo, Nook, all play audiobooks in their reading apps. Other thoughts, Tom says, I'm reading The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, The Fight for a Human Future at the New Frontier of Power by Shoshana Zuboff. Disturbing and informative. Tom included a link to an interview that the author did with Kara Swisher, and I'll include that in the show notes. Tom signed off by noting he had emailed me from his iPad mini saying, loving it. I never liked reading much on larger iPads, but this hits a sweet spot. Dean Ricken emailed about last week's show. Len, best episode in a while. I like this type of information. I found the tip on the reading insights very helpful. I found I have 44 weeks in a row and 299 days in a row since this was set up on August 1st, 2018. I downloaded my first book from Kindle to my iPhone on January 30th, 2011, so my streak would probably go back to that date. I read mostly on my phone, as it is with me all the time, standing in line at the bank or in line at Costco. I also read on my Oasis, the original model. I like it because it is smaller than the new Oasis. Darlene would agree with you on that one. Also, I have several Kindle Fires, a Fire 7, an HD8, and an HD10. I listen to your podcast in my office on Saturday morning and have for several years. Keep it going. Thanks, Dean Ricken. Well, thank you, Dean. I love hearing about your arsenal of Kindle reading devices, which is very similar to my own. And finally, I have an email from Stephanie in Concord, Massachusetts, who wrote, loved this annotated interview. Really enjoyed hearing more from your side than usual. Full disclosure, Stephanie is my sister, so her feedback is particularly appreciated. If you would like to weigh in about something that you hear on the show, please feel free to email me at podchronicles@gmail.com. And thanks to everyone that wrote last week. I really enjoyed reading those responses to kind of an unusual episode. That's it for this week. Next week's show will come to you from Las Vegas, Nevada, where I will cover the 3-day Jeff Bezos-hosted RE:Mars event, along with other members of the press. I feel as if I should spend at least 24 hours not reading or taking in any news or other information for that long before it starts on Tuesday morning. The better to have my mental tank as close to empty as possible. It's going to be an exciting event, and I hope you will enjoy my account of it on TKC 566 next Friday, June 7th. That night, I will return to Denver, and 3 days later, Darlene, the Yorkie Claire, and I will fly to Boston for our annual summer migration to New England until the end of the year. I always find these transitions between the East and the West a bit of a challenge. I love Denver and Cambridge in Maine, so each time I experience a fair amount of sadness about our move in either direction, kind of saying goodbye to people I hang out with here and there. Of course, it's the leaving family. I spent some time on this. Darlene, who I think is in general a little more emotionally balanced than I am, is simply focused on the joy of what's ahead of us, like grandchildren and other family and the sound of the surf at Ocean Park. I'm not sure if Claire goes through any emotional challenge on our moves, but I do know that whenever our suitcases are out, she stays very close to us and sometimes curls up inside the suitcases to make sure we don't forget to take her. It's all good, and I look forward to bringing you along on our travels as well via the podcast. This is Len Edgerly saying goodnight from downtown Denver. Thanks for listening.